The air in the room is thick, suffocating. It smells of stale coffee and polished desperation. Outside, the city hums, oblivious. Inside, the world fractures. His face, usually a mask of practiced charm, is slack with disbelief, then twists into something ugly, primal. He opens his mouth, but no sound comes out. Only a harsh, dry gasp. His eyes, fixed on me, hold a terror I've never seen, a mirror of the ruin he meticulously planned for me. My own breath is calm, steady. The pounding in my chest, a constant companion for months, has finally quieted. A profound stillness settles over me, cold and absolute. This isn't just a moment. It's the precise point where the axis of my broken life rights itself, spinning violently in a new direction, carrying him away into the debris field he created. His lawyer is sputtering, flapping papers like frightened birds. The judge, perched high on his bench, leans forward, his usual impassivity replaced by a flicker of something I can't quite read, shock, perhaps, or grudging respect. This silence stretches, vibrating with the weight of everything unsaid, everything undone. This is it. The end of his game. The beginning of my own, built on the ashes he thought would bury me. If this story feels familiar, that crushing weight of being counted out, tell me in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Life, before the fracturing, felt solid. Like a well-built house with deep foundations. We built it together, brick by brick, dream by dream. Or so I believed. There were weekends spent sketching renovations on napkins, late nights talking about futures that seemed so intertwined they were a single entity. He was ambitious, charismatic, driven. I admired that. It was part of the pull, the magnetic force that drew me in and held me fast for years. We met young, still figuring out the contours of the world and our place in it. He saw things in me, or claimed to. He saw potential, a partner, someone whose quiet strength could complement his outward drive. I saw in him a future, security, a shared adventure. We built a life that looked successful from the outside. The nice house, the cars, the vacations, the comfortable rhythm of shared routines and inside jokes. We didn't have children. That was a conversation we'd skirted, sometimes deferred, sometimes decided against with a mutual shrug that felt right at the time. Now, looking back, I wonder if that absence made the severing easier for him. One less tether to cut. One less shared future he had to acknowledge destroying. Our world was just ours. And his, it turned out, was a world he was building specifically for himself, with me as a temporary, useful inhabitant. I poured myself into our life, into his life. I supported his career, celebrated his successes, navigated the social landscapes that were crucial to his advancement. I was the steady presence, the safe harbor he could always return to. I found my own fulfillment in nurturing our home, pursuing my own quiet interests, building a life that felt rich in ways that weren't just financial. There was comfort in the predictability, the shared history, the feeling of being part of a unit. I believed in us, in the vows we'd spoken, in the silent promise of partnership that underpins a marriage. I believed our foundation was love, trust, mutual respect. The cracks were subtle at first. Easy to overlook, easy to explain away. Late nights at the office turned into all-nighters that bled into weekends. Business trips grew longer, more frequent. His phone became an extension of his hand, guarded, shielded from my view. He became more distant, less present even when he was physically in the room. Conversations became transactional, updates on schedules, logistics, bills. The easy intimacy we once shared evaporated, replaced by a polite formality that felt alien. When I tried to talk about it, about the distance, the feeling of being adrift from each other, he'd dismiss it. Stress from work, he'd say. Big deals on the horizon. Just a phase. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. So I did. I told myself I was being needy, overly sensitive. I gave him space. I tried harder to be the supportive wife he needed. I doubled down on my role, hoping my presence, my stability, would somehow draw him back. It never occurred to me that he was already gone. The day it happened is etched in my memory like a scar. A Tuesday. Gray and overcast, the kind of day that feels heavy with unspoken burdens. I was at home, working in my study, when the doorbell rang. It wasn't a delivery, not a friend. It was a man in a crisp suit, holding a thick envelope. Legal papers. My heart dropped before I even opened it. Divorce. Filed by him. Without a word. Without a conversation, a warning, a hint that this was coming. Just a cold, official document outlining his desire to dissolve our marriage, citing irreconcilable differences, a bland, meaningless phrase that felt like a profound insult to the life we'd shared. My hands shook as I read through the legalese, the cold language stripping away years of shared history, reducing our life to assets and liabilities. He wanted the house, or its significant portion. He wanted control of the finances. He wanted everything he could possibly take. The accompanying letter from his lawyer was polite, almost condescending, suggesting we could reach an amicable agreement. But the filing itself, the secrecy, the sheer audacity of hitting me with it blindsided like a physical blow. The first few days were a blur of shock and disbelief. I moved through the house like a ghost, the familiar rooms feeling alien, haunted by the past and the abrupt, violent ending of everything I thought I knew. I tried calling him. He didn't answer. I left messages, pleading, hurt, angry. He didn't reply. The silence from his end was deafening, a new form of communication, one of absolute dismissal. This wasn't a mutual parting of ways. This was an execution. I felt foolish, naive. How could I have been so blind? How could I have shared my life, my hopes, my vulnerabilities with someone capable of such calculated cruelty? The betrayal wasn't just the divorce filing, it was the years of pretense, the shared smiles, the future plans he must have been articulating while secretly planning his exit strategy. It felt like discovering the entire landscape of my life had been a carefully constructed facade. Finding a lawyer felt like navigating a foreign country without a map. I was emotionally shattered, functionally numb. My initial consultations were a haze of legal jargon and stern faces telling me I was in a difficult position. He had moved quickly, securing one of the best divorce lawyers in the city, a shark known for aggressive tactics and winning at all costs. My own lawyer, while competent, seemed cautious, advising me to prepare for a difficult fight, to manage my expectations. Expectations? My only expectation had been a lifetime together. Now it was reduced to a battle over possessions and numbers on a spreadsheet. The process began its slow, grinding march forward. Discovery. Financial disclosures. Interrogatories. Each piece of paper was a fresh wound. His disclosures were incomplete. Assets were listed vaguely, values underestimated. Bank accounts I knew about were missing. Businesses he had interests in were not fully disclosed. It was clear he was hiding things. Everything. His lawyer stonewalled my lawyer's requests, delayed proceedings, filed motions that seemed designed purely to exhaust me emotionally and financially. I started digging. Quietly, relentlessly. Not because my lawyer told me to, but because a cold knot of determination had begun to form in my gut, coexisting with the pain. I couldn't just stand by and be stripped bare. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about truth. It was about not letting him get away with erasing me and our shared past while protecting his fraudulent future. I went through old files, joint accounts, emails, anything I could access. It was slow, tedious work, often interrupted by waves of grief and anger. Each hidden transaction, each undeclared asset felt like another layer of betrayal peeled back, revealing the depth of his deception. He didn't just want a divorce, he wanted to dismantle me. He used the legal system as a weapon, leveraging his financial power and his lawyer's aggression to make the process as painful and costly for me as possible. Every proposed settlement offer was derisory, an insult, clearly designed to force me into submission out of sheer exhaustion. He seemed to relish the power imbalance, the control he exerted over my future. In the few brief encounters we had, supervised by lawyers. His demeanor was chillingly detached, sometimes even jovial. He acted like this was an inconvenience, a necessary evil to achieve his next, better life. One day, during a particularly tense mediation session, his lawyer laid out an offer that was laughably inadequate. It wouldn't even cover my legal fees, let alone provide any semblance of financial stability for me moving forward. When my lawyer pushed back, citing the incomplete disclosures and the unfairness of the proposal, he leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. He looked directly at me, his eyes cold and hard. "She should take it," he said, his voice low but carrying across the sterile room. "It's more than she deserves. Frankly, after this, she'll never recover. Not financially, not. Ever." The words hung in the air, heavy with malice. Never recover. He wasn't just stating a prediction, he was pronouncing a sentence. It was a confirmation of his true intent, not just to leave the marriage, but to obliterate my ability to rebuild my life. My lawyer started to object, but I held up a hand, silencing her. I looked at him, absorbing the full force of his cruelty. Something shifted inside me in that moment. The fear, the pain, the confusion, they didn't vanish, but they were overlaid by a hard, protective shell. He thought he was breaking me. He was, in fact, forging me into something else. Something he wouldn't recognize. Something stronger. His confidence was absolute. He believed his money, his lawyer, his connections, and my perceived fragility made him invincible. He talked openly about his future plans within earshot of others, new ventures, new opportunities, all funded, I knew, by the assets he was trying to keep hidden. He spoke about his social circle, the influential people he networked with, the places where real power was wielded. One name came up repeatedly: the judge presiding over our case. Judge Thompson. Not in any improper way, of course, just references to charity galas they both attended, the same exclusive country club where they were both members, shared interests in golf and business ventures. Innocent enough on the surface, but it painted a picture of a tight-knit, privileged world where connections mattered, where favors might be subtly exchanged, where a man like my husband felt perfectly at home and perfectly protected. He was arrogant, utterly convinced of his impending victory. This was my deepening crisis. Everything felt like it was slipping away. The legal bills were mounting, my savings dwindling. His hidden assets remained largely hidden despite my efforts. The system felt rigged, designed to favor the powerful, the connected, the ruthless. My lawyer advised compromise, cutting my losses. Friends, trying to be helpful, suggested I just move on, accept whatever crumbs he offered, and try to rebuild somewhere far away from his shadow. But the thought of him winning, of him standing over the wreckage of my life with that smirk, that pronouncement, "She'll never recover," was unbearable. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about defying that sentence. It was about proving him wrong. Not just for me, but for the part of me that refused to be extinguished. I spent sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, my mind a frantic tangle of worry and despair. I replayed every conversation, every slight, every piece of legal maneuvering. I looked at the limited financial information I had, trying to find a thread, a weakness, an angle. There had to be something. He was too cavalier, too confident. People like him made mistakes. They just didn't think anyone would be smart enough or determined enough to find them. One night, poring over old business records of his that I'd managed to retrieve, a dusty box from the back of a closet he'd forgotten about, I found it. Not a smoking gun of hidden cash, not outright fraud I could easily prove, but something more subtle, more complex. A series of investments, tied to offshore entities he hadn't disclosed, woven into a complex web of holding companies. And buried deep within the tangled structure, a series of significant, undocumented payments. Payments that weren't tied to any obvious business transaction. Payments made out to various entities, some with innocuous names, some with names that meant nothing to me. Yet. This wasn't the definitive proof I needed for court, not yet. It was a thread. A dark, promising thread. I started pulling. This required different expertise. Not just a divorce lawyer, but forensic accountants, private investigators. Resources I barely had. But the desperation fueled me. This was the midpoint shift. The moment where I stopped reacting to his moves and started looking for a way to make my own. A way to not just survive, but to fundamentally alter the battlefield. I hired a forensic accountant, a quiet woman with sharp eyes who asked precise questions. I showed her what I'd found. She didn't show surprise, just a focused intensity. It would be expensive, she warned. Difficult to trace across international borders and through layers of corporate veils. I told her to proceed. I liquidated what little I could without impacting my immediate ability to live and pay legal fees. I borrowed against my small retirement fund. I was betting everything on this thread. The accountant's work was slow, meticulous. She uncovered more connections, more hidden accounts, more payments flowing through opaque channels. The picture emerging was one of significant, deliberate asset concealment. But proving intent, proving it was his money being hidden, was the challenge. His legal structure was designed for plausible deniability. His lawyer was masterful at exploiting ambiguity. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings continued their brutal pace. His lawyer escalated. Motions were filed demanding I pay his legal fees, alleging I was deliberately dragging out the case. He cut off my access to joint credit cards completely. I was living on a strict budget, every expense scrutinized. The house, our house, felt less like a home and more like a contested property I might soon lose. Every interaction with him, or through his lawyer, was a reminder of his power, his contempt, his certainty that he was winning. One evening, exhausted after a day of sifting through financial statements, I stumbled upon something else in that dusty box. Not financial. Personal. A membership directory for the exclusive country club he belonged to. The one Judge Thompson was also a member of. Flipping through the pages, I saw names I recognized from newspaper society pages, from his business dinners, from the charity events he'd mentioned. This wasn't just a golf club, it was a nexus of power and influence. And there, listed among the esteemed members, was Judge Thompson. And next to his name, his home address. Listed as being on the grounds of the country club. Not just a member, he lived there. In a private residence within the club's exclusive perimeter. A seed was planted. A wild, impossible thought. But it wouldn't leave me. The country club. The center of his social universe. The judge's actual home address. What if? The thought was too audacious, too ridiculous. But it grew, nurtured by my desperation and the cold fury that was replacing my pain. It was a symbol of everything he represented, exclusivity, untouchable privilege, a world I was now being cast out of. The deepening crisis hit its nadir. My funds were critically low. My lawyer was pushing harder for settlement, any settlement, arguing I couldn't sustain the fight. His lawyer was gloating, sensing victory. She's bleeding out, I overheard his lawyer say during a court recess, loud enough for me to hear. My husband smiled, a cruel, thin line. Just as planned, he murmured back. I felt a profound sense of despair settle over me. Was this it? Was I truly going to be broken by him, just as he predicted? The image of his face, his smug satisfaction, the cold pronouncement, "She'll never recover," flashed in my mind. Something inside me snapped. Not broke. Snapped taut, like a wire pulled to its absolute limit. I wouldn't let him win. I couldn't. That night, I made a decision that felt both insane and inevitable. I gathered the fragmented findings from the forensic accountant, the old membership directory, every scrap of information I had gathered on his network, his hidden assets, and crucially, the country club and its significance, including the judge's residency on the property. I contacted the forensic accountant and the private investigator. I pooled every last cent I had, sold some remaining personal assets, even swallowed my pride and asked a distant relative for a significant loan, pledging future non-existent earnings as collateral. This wasn't just a turning point, it was a leap into the void. My plan was audacious. It was risky. It relied on a convergence of circumstances I couldn't fully control. It involved leveraging the hidden financial information not just for the divorce case itself, but for something far bigger, far more disruptive to his carefully constructed world. It centered on the country club, not just as a symbol but as a physical, financial entity. The country club was old, established, but like many such institutions, it had financial vulnerabilities. Decades of deferred maintenance, internal political squabbles, perhaps over-leveraged investments, or declining membership in certain demographics. Finding this information wasn't easy. It required the investigator's skills, quiet inquiries, digging into public records, and perhaps some discreet conversations with disgruntled former employees or members. The forensic accountant continued tracking the hidden funds, finding patterns, connections to entities that, while not directly proving asset hiding for the divorce, painted a picture of complex, undisclosed wealth and potentially questionable financial practices stretching back years. These weren't just divorce assets. They were business dealings, investments, income streams he had kept entirely secret, even from me, throughout our marriage. This was his real vulnerability, not just the divorce settlement, but the potential unraveling of his entire financial empire if sunlight hit its shadiest corners. My target wasn't just a bigger settlement. It was disruption. It was leveraging his secrets, his hubris, and the specific ecosystem he felt safe in. The country club was for sale. Not publicly, not obviously. It was a quiet offering, perhaps due to financial distress, available only through a network of high-end real estate brokers who specialized in such discreet transactions. The asking price was astronomical, far beyond my reach. But I wasn't planning to buy it outright with revealed divorce assets. I was planning to buy it with leverage. The plan was complex, involving legal maneuvers that skirted the edges of conventional divorce proceedings. It involved finding investors interested in a distressed property, investors I could only attract by demonstrating the real scale of my husband's hidden wealth and the potential legal issues he faced, using the information from the forensic accountant as a sword hanging over his head. It involved timing, precision, and an absolute poker face. I had to make him believe I was still the broken, defeated woman he had left. Every encounter, every legal filing from my side, had to project weakness, desperation, a willingness to settle for far less than I deserved, while secretly, relentlessly, I was building my arsenal. The day of the final divorce hearing arrived. The air in the courtroom felt charged, heavy with anticipation. Lawyers bustled, papers rustled. My husband sat at his table, looking confident, almost bored. His lawyer had the smug look of a predator about to close in on weakened prey. I sat beside my lawyer, outwardly calm, inwardly a storm of nerves and steely resolve. The judge entered, and everyone rose. Judge Thompson. His face impassive, but I knew where he lived. I knew he was a pillar of the community centered around that country club. I knew that world was important to him. The hearing began. His lawyer presented their final arguments, rehashing the inadequate settlement offer, painting me as unreasonable, greedy, and incapable of managing significant assets. He cited my lack of recent major professional experience, my dependence on my husband's income during the marriage. He painted a picture of a woman who was asking for too much, who needed to be realistic, who should accept her diminished circumstances. He ended by reiterating my husband's position. This offer was final, generous even, and designed to allow her to eventually get back on her feet, though it might take a very long time. The unspoken part, the part one heard loud and clear, was if she ever recovers. My lawyer presented our side, detailing his hidden assets, his deceptive financial practices, arguing for a fair division of the marital estate, including the assets he had attempted to conceal. It was a solid legal argument, but I knew, based on the judge's previous rulings and demeanor, that we were facing an uphill battle. He seemed inclined to accept the easier narrative, the one presented by the powerful, well-connected man. Then it was my turn to speak. I had prepared my statement meticulously. My lawyer had reviewed it, raising concerns about its unconventional nature, but I was resolute. This wasn't just about the legal facts, it was about shifting the power dynamic entirely. I stood up, facing the judge, but I directed my words, my gaze, directly at my soon-to-be ex-husband. "Your Honor," I began, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the courtroom tension. "We have spent months discussing assets, liabilities, and the division of what was once a shared life. My husband's counsel has argued for a settlement that he believes is fair, citing my need to recover from this process." I paused, letting the word hang in the air. I saw a flicker of something in my husband's eyes, a slight stiffening. He knew I had heard him. "My husband," I continued, my voice gaining a quiet strength, "has expressed, both in and out of this courtroom, his certainty that I will never recover from this divorce. That I will be financially, perhaps even personally ruined." I saw his eyes narrow slightly, a touch of irritation. He probably thought I was just playing the victim, trying to garner sympathy. "He believes," I said, my gaze locking onto his, "that he has secured his own future, his standing, his comfort, by ensuring my diminishment. He believes his world, built on certain connections and certain institutions, remains untouchable." I took a slow breath. This was the moment. "It has become clear to me," I stated, my voice resonating with a calm finality, "that recovery, in my husband's eyes, means returning to a state where I am no longer a threat, no longer capable of disrupting the world he so carefully protects." He underestimated, perhaps, my understanding of that world, and my determination not just to recover, but to redefine what recovery means on my own terms. My lawyer shot me a nervous glance. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably. My husband looked confused, the smugness beginning to falter. "Your Honor." I turned back to the judge, who was watching me intently, his initial flicker of reaction now a fixed, alert stare. "While my husband has been focused on hiding assets and predicting my ruin, I have been focused on my future. A future that does not involve merely surviving, but thriving. And thriving, it turns out, requires access to the very institutions he believed would remain exclusively his." I reached into my briefcase, not for legal documents, but for a single, crisp folder. I placed it on the railing in front of me. "Therefore, Your Honor, I wish to inform the court and my husband that the financial resources I have secured, resources my husband believed I would never obtain, have been utilized to make a significant acquisition." My husband frowned. His lawyer leaned towards him, whispering. "Effective as of this morning," I announced, my voice steady, delivering the words like perfectly aimed darts, "I have completed the acquisition of a controlling interest in the Blackwood Country Club." The silence that followed was absolute. The air pressure seemed to drop. His lawyer froze, his jaw literally dropping open. The judge's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, but the effect was profound. My husband's face went ashen. The blood drained from his cheeks, leaving a sallow, stunned mask. He looked utterly blindsided. His carefully constructed composure shattered in an instant. He stared at me, speechless, his eyes wide with shock and incomprehension. Blackwood Country Club, the heart of his social and business network. The place where he golfed with influential people, where deals were discussed over expensive dinners, where the judge himself resided. "I have also," I added, my voice dropping slightly, leaning into the moment, a cold satisfaction curling in my gut, "taken up residence in the primary club guest house, effective immediately." I felt it was important to be close to operations. That's when he froze. Utterly, completely frozen. His eyes glazed over slightly, fixed on me, but not seeing me. He looked like a statue carved from ice, melting under the sudden heat of a truth he couldn't comprehend. The man who had laughed and said I'd never recover was staring into an abyss of his own making, realizing I hadn't just survived. I had bought the ground he stood on and was now living in his backyard. His lawyer finally found his voice, a strangled squawk of objection, something about relevancy, about this being a divorce proceeding. But the judge held up a hand, silencing him. The judge's gaze was back on me, no longer just alert, but sharp, calculating. My acquisition of the club, particularly one where he lived and had significant ties, injected an entirely new, deeply uncomfortable dynamic into the proceedings. My financial power, dismissed moments before, was now undeniable, theatrically demonstrated, and connected to a key figure in his life. The legal battle wasn't instantly over, of course. His lawyer scrambled, trying to regain footing, challenging the source of my funds, the relevance of the acquisition. But the shift was irreversible. I had demonstrated not just financial capability he denied I possessed, but a strategic intelligence he had fatally underestimated. The information from the forensic accountant, now used to secure investors for the club purchase, suddenly held immense weight. It wasn't just evidence for asset division. It was evidence of a pattern of hidden wealth that could attract far more serious attention than a divorce court. The potential unraveling of his complex, questionable financial dealings was a gun I now held, pointed squarely at the heart of his world. The climax wasn't just the announcement. It was the slow, agonizing realization dawning on his face, the visible collapse of his arrogance. He sputtered, he blustered when he finally unfroze, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. The ground had shifted beneath him, literally and figuratively. He was no longer the predator. He was the cornered animal. The divorce settlement that followed was drastically different. The judge, navigating the awkward reality of the situation, pushed hard for a resolution. My husband's focus had shifted from grinding me into dust to damage control, to preventing the deeper dive into his financials that my control of the club and my newly acquired leverage could unleash. He conceded on assets he had fought tooth and nail to hide, agreed to a settlement that was not only fair, but generous, designed to ensure my silence and cooperation regarding his other financial activities. He didn't just lose the battle. He lost the war on terms he dictated, but I redefined. Life at Blackwood Country Club is different. It's a strange, surreal existence. I don't exactly move in to the club itself in the traditional sense, but the guest house is a substantial, private residence on the grounds, historically used for VIPs or as temporary executive housing. It overlooks the 18th green. My windows face the very fairway where my ex-husband and Judge Thompson likely discussed their lives, oblivious to the storm gathering on the horizon. I don't play golf. I don't attend the society galas, though I am, technically, the primary stakeholder of the institution that hosts them. My presence here is a constant, silent reminder, a monument to his miscalculation. I see him sometimes from a distance, on the course, or at the clubhouse. He avoids my gaze. His arrogance has been replaced by a visible discomfort, a constant watchfulness. His world hasn't completely collapsed, not outwardly, but the foundations are shaky, and he knows I know where the cracks are. Judge Thompson eventually recused himself from my case, citing unavoidable conflicts. My husband's legal problems didn't end with a divorce. The information I uncovered attracted other, less forgiving eyes. There were investigations, lawsuits, a dismantling of the financial empire he thought was impregnable. He didn't go to jail, but his influence, his wealth, his standing, the very things he valued most, were significantly diminished. He did, in fact, recover, but it was a much humbler, more difficult recovery than the one he'd predicted for me. And he recovered under my shadow. I didn't acquire the country club out of spite, not entirely. It was a strategic move, a way to leverage information and gain control in a situation where I had none. But living here, on the grounds of his former sanctuary, there is a profound sense of vindication. He tried to erase me, to render me invisible and powerless. Instead, I became an undeniable, permanent fixture in the very landscape he believed defined him. They say living well is the best revenge. I don't know if this is revenge. It feels more like reclaiming stolen territory, rebuilding on solid ground I had to fight dirty to obtain. I am recovering every single day, not from the divorce itself, which was merely the instrument of his betrayal, but from the damage of being unseen, underestimated, and discarded. I am building something new here, not just for myself, but perhaps for the club, for its future. A future that no longer includes him in the way he envisioned. He laughed and said I'd never recover. He never imagined I'd recover right here, at the heart of his world, watching it crumble from the inside. If this story hit close to home, if you've ever felt underestimated or counted out, I'd love to hear your version in the comments below. Subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life. Thanks for being here.